So, welcome everyone, and I know we have some new folks joining us and some folks who weren't here earlier. So today is the beginning of a new text, and we just read the translation by Thich Nhat Hanh of the Heart Sutra. This is the text we'll be studying for the next few months. And already it might give rise to a little bit of confusion. So the Heart Sutra is the heart of Prajnaparamita, or the heart of wisdom, and it is a pith instruction or a zip file. We could be studying the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, 10,000 lines, or 100,000 lines. But this is why we recite and study the Heart Sutra, because it references a huge body of knowledge and a huge body of wisdom in a way that helps us remember the key points that lead to this fearless state of compassionate wisdom. So I've been contemplating, for the last 3 or 4 months, what text we should study next. And I have been feeling like it's very similar now to when we started the Sunday Dharma, which began during COVID, which we all experienced as a shocking, scary change in our world and in our lives. There was immediate overnight insecurity, it seemed like. We had no idea of how we were going to cope or what the future would be like. And probably universally, we were hoping that it would go back at least to the way that it was, which was imperfect. But it was certainly in its imperfection better than the COVID times. But life doesn't actually work like that. Now, 5 years later, the world has shifted again for us, particularly those of us in the US. A different kind of governing has arisen, and it feels like the world changed overnight again. Our ways of thinking about our families and our work, how we're going to cope, again, is scarily uncertain. And what it points out to us is that as much as we want to believe that there is something secure, there actually is not. The boundaries and definitions of how we work and live together as a country and as a global community is shifting. And it feels scary because we have expectations and concepts that we project internally and externally. If you think about our unconsidered or uninvestigated expectation, generally we go to bed and we wake up just assuming that things are going to be the same as it was yesterday. Our lives, our bodies, our families. And if we admitted it, we would have an expectation that maybe it'd be a little bit better. But it can't be the same as it was yesterday. I'm actually enjoying the spring light that has shifted every morning. We're one day closer to spring. The snow has melted a little more. We're one day older. A dream may have changed our moods. And similarly, all our dear ones are one day older with shifting moods. So the very foundation of Buddhism, what Buddha taught in his first talk, was something we call the Four Noble Truths. The truth of suffering, the truth of the causes of suffering, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. The contradictions between our expectations, assumptions, hopes, wishes, and projections, and the nature of our ever-changing world causes us suffering. our world is an ever-changing ecosystem of beings and phenomena that change moment to moment to moment. And we have a desire to stop and make things permanent. We have a desire for some imaginary state that feels good to us is something we can achieve and stay in. And usually we include those we hold dear. We want to wake up today better. But it's just not the nature of our bodies or of our world. A quote from Shantideva, "For all anxiety and fear, all suffering, in boundless measure, their source and wellspring is the mind itself." It's this contradiction of our minds versus the nature of the world, and that includes ourselves and phenomena. That contradiction causes us suffering. So I was contemplating the studies we've done since COVID and remembering how the impulse to start this Sunday Dharma and study the Bodhisattva's Guide to the Way of Life was recognizing that each and every one of us has this innate compassion and kindness. And we wanted to learn how to navigate COVID with compassion and kindness. So we studied the great, great text on loving kindness and compassion, the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And then we studied the very practical text, Lojong, or the 7 Points of Mind Training. And for those of you who are new, we spent a year and a half on each of these texts. The 7 Points of Mind Training showed us, well, how do we put the ideals of loving kindness and compassion into our daily life? And then as we learned more and more, we could see that at the root of our difficulties is the inner states of our mind, particularly the states that give rise to anger and addiction and jealousy, what we call the strong emotions. And we started to be able to see how we could take responsibility for our side, the mental state of these emotions, in any of the crises that arose in our life. What we could take responsibility for was our side. Calm our minds, see what's happening. So we progressed to a study of calm abiding meditation, and calm abiding meditation helped us see that at the root of these difficult emotions is a distraction from our innate kindness and compassion, a distraction from our intention to traverse the world we experience with kindness, and that the distraction can be very, very subtle. So we look to see how these emotions arise in our mind, how we can pacify these emotions, and how we can see the moment of distraction, which allows the emotions to arise or the confused thinking to arise in our mind. So each of these texts have been just extraordinary and helpful, and woven through all of the texts is this incredible concept of seeing the world not through our confused eyes, not through our expectations and assumptions, but seeing the nature of the world and the nature of our minds as they actually are. And the actual seeing is a capacity called prajna, or wisdom. So you can see the heart of wisdom is another translation of the Heart Sutra. we don't really have a way to translate this word wisdom, this state that is beyond our confused thinking. And the words that we use are not clear enough. We use the word emptiness, we use the word boundlessness, and the word Thich Nhat Hanh uses is interbeing. So when we look at what our previous texts have been explaining, we can see in the Bodhisattva's way of life that this concept of emptiness, boundlessness, interbeing was essentially the two major chapters in the Bodhisattva's way of life, chapters 8 and 9. So I'm going to read one verse to help you remember. Yes, we studied this. If the whole range of adversities, sufferings, and fears in the world arises from grasping onto a self, what use is this grasping to me? Or from our Lojong studies, the first slogan is train in the preliminaries, precious human life, impermanence, karma, and suffering. We're looking at this morning all of those bundled into impermanence and suffering. But the second slogan is regard all dharmas as dreams. Although experience may seem solid, they are passing memories. So we're looking at what causes our suffering, and this grasping expressed through the expectations, projections that I will stay the same, the world will stay the same, and it's going to be some imaginary good state to get to. And what we directly experience that's in contradiction to that, how do we work with that from the perspective of the mind training is first to start by not concretizing it, not reifying it, not assuming that our expectations, assumptions, and projections are actually true. Try regarding them as dreams. So when we start to relate to them as closer to our dreams, we can accept that impermanence, shifting, not holding the solidity that causes us suffering. When we wake up from a dream, we go, oh, that never was what I thought it was. That person didn't hit me. That monster didn't chase me. I can let go of that. And then the suffering from that dream state disappears. Now we're looking at our daily experience and saying, well, if I can face everything in the dream state with equanimity the next morning, how do I address everything in my daily life? So both of the two major texts, as well as our meditation training, is pointing out that the enemy of progress of our understanding is this holding on to a solid, independent, unique, separate self that needs to be protected and appeased in terms of all of its desires. And we want to know, all right, if that is what is causing me suffering, what is causing my friends and family suffering, how do I start to understand the causes in my mind for that expectation, projection, false assumption that is at the root of suffering. And how do I live with a peaceful mind, fully loving, open heart? So the more we soften one, the more we increase the other. Less focus on self, more peaceful, open heart. And it's not just a focus of self. Once we see the nature of this shifting dreamlike experience as it is, once we see the nature as it is, fearless compassion gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And, I know all of you fairly well now. I know that that's your aspiration. So how do we actually fully enact what we aspire to, and how do we traverse these very difficult times with this wisdom? And it's tremendously interesting to me that when the Buddha was ready to teach this, he changed the location. So when Buddha was teaching the Four Noble Truths, he was on the plains near Bodh Gaya. When he was teaching every year for 3 months a year during the rainy season, he was teaching on the plains in Charvasti. It's a very, very flat land. But when he taught the Heart Sutra, he went to Vulture Peak Mountain. And Vulture Peak Mountain is almost in between these locations. And at the top of Vulture Peak Mountain, it's almost like, I think Bodh Gaya is maybe 100 kilometers away, and Charvasti is even closer. So you can almost see them, but it is on top of a mountain. And all of a sudden, there is a total change of perspective. From the top of the mountain, the sky and the earth are one entity. Our little marketplace, all the squabbles in the villages, squabbles in our families, squabbles in our Sangha, all of a sudden it's one big community with all kinds of states of mind, all kinds of states of potential, but there is a perception of the bigger picture, of the interbeing that is the word that Thich Nhat Hanh uses to express wisdom. There's more of a sense of my small issues not are less important, but are shared among many, many people with many different kinds of issues, many different kinds of problems, many different kinds of skills, wisdoms, and potentialities in and on and with an ecosystem in which all of our actions are interacting with the phenomena, the earth that we're living on, which is also changing every day. So we have, for the site of giving this teaching, a complete perspective shift. And this teaching is very pivotal in Buddhism because it marks the change between early Buddhism or foundational Buddhism and later Buddhism, which we call Mahayana Buddhism. And it reflects a natural evolution of the studies of the Sangha, or the experiences or the practices of the Sangha. So many people came to the Buddha when they were in desperate suffering. They actually came to the Buddha during wartime. And like us, they're saying to Buddha, help me get out of my suffering, which is just so difficult. Please help me. So in order to calm everyone's minds, Buddha taught the causes of suffering in a way that everyone could understood directly in their experience, in their lives. If I'm angry and I hit someone, they hit me back, we start a war. Very clear. The world is changing, my body is changing, I can see it. Very, very clear. Now, on the top of Vulture Peak Mountain, essentially, he was saying, there's more, it's bigger. It's not just about your suffering, it's about the suffering of all sentient beings. Our aspiration is not just to get out of our own suffering, maybe help our families, but all sentient beings. We have grown enough that we can see that our actions affect everyone, and everyone's actions affect us. We can't build a walled-off home where nothing's going to touch us. Walled-off city, walled-off country. We know from climate change, it's touching everyone. All of our actions are touching everyone. But Buddha is saying now, seeing this, I'm also asking you to not grab on to the foundation Dharma teachings as a fix for samsara, as something that's going to fix everything in your life. This is all conceptual. What I've taught you so far is conceptual, and it's bigger. Now, you feel like you're on a boat and you're secure again. Okay, I can rely on the Dharma. I know what to do if it's difficult. I'm going to hold on to my boat on this stormy ocean. He's saying, okay, good start. Now you have to leave the boat behind. Now you have to leap. You have to leap out of that desire for safety and security. You have to leave the boat behind. And this leaving the boat behind is a full understanding of interbeing, interconnectedness, interdependence, and that all of these wonderful ways of thinking are in and of themselves permeated by this openness that doesn't grab onto anything as a safe fix. We're leaping into openness, though there isn't a safe fix. There is a continuous manifestation of life in all of its arising, appearing in the, let's say, the openness of the sky, and we are responding with compassion and kindness to whatever arises. So with this view, you can see how our opening prayer makes sense. May all sentient beings, especially the enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, attain enlightenment. For the sake of the enlightenment of all sentient beings, including my enemies, may I practice. May they all have happiness and be released from suffering. We are being invited to join inter-R, as a perspective shift that we become with this open, inclusive heart. And as we study the Heart Sutra, we start to understand that with full wisdom, we're able to embody this aspiration, not only have the aspiration, which I feel you all have, but actually understand to the point that we can embody. So, any kind of change is difficult. And when the Buddha gave this talk, it said that the people who'd been practicing for decades and, gee, they felt they understood and they really got their security in the Dharma, they fainted. So please, I think you have confidence because we've introduced these concepts really in all of the talks, but we haven't addressed them directly. The concept of interbeing or of emptiness or of boundlessness. And now we're going to start looking at this directly. And this will enable our understanding to progress, enable our aspiration to get closer to how we act in the world, and get all of us closer to liberation or closer to fearless compassion. So we're going to gather courage and move from the very understandable thought of get me out of here to our aspiration to include our enemies with the same care, concern, and love as we do our dearest and our grandchildren and our beloveds. And not only have that aspiration, but get closer to having that aspiration and understanding of wisdom actually shift our perspective. So we can act from the perspective of wisdom instead of the perspective of fear. So I'd like to invite you to just sort of sit with this a minute. Sit with any worries or trepidation to, oh yes, I have this aspiration. It's really confusing times right now. What gives me the skill to best benefit self and others, and to meet these times with a perspective of fearless compassion and wisdom. So let's sit. So I haven't seen anybody faint, so we're okay. So we'll be looking at Thich Nhat Hanh's translation in the Tuesday, Thursday class. Up to this point, we've been using Kaz Tanahashi's translation. The great traditions. Kaz Tanahashi is from a contemporary translator from the Japanese tradition, one of the great translators in that tradition. And his version is poetic, let's say. And I've always felt it's a good way for those of us who, you know, this whole idea is so new and foreign to our Western way of thinking. It's a really good way to start to contemplate it. And then Thich Nhat Hanh gets more explicit about the concepts that are being presented. And as over time, as we look at it, we'll see that it's sort of presented like a mnemonic. Each word refers to a teaching or a series of teachings. And so we'll go very slowly looking at all the concepts it's referencing, as well as the significance of the shift of perspectives. So Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the great translators in the Vietnamese tradition. And we also have Tibetan translations that are wonderful. And I will, as I'm able, put 3 translations together on the website, the Thich Nhat Hanh, the Kaz Tanahashi, and the Tibetan translation that I use of Khenpo Palden Sherab, who was a great translator in the Tibetan tradition, just so you can see that what we receive is the perspective of the translator, and how seeing several different translations helps us gain a bigger perspective. And then the text that I feel is a really good beginning text to approach the Heart Sutra is Thich Nhat Hanh's The Heart of Understanding. And that's available as a PDF, and you can order the book, which is small and short and easy to read. But that will be the main reference text, although I'll be looking at other texts as we go forward. So I'm excited that we're ready for this and prepared for this, and that this might be the most important text to study in this particular moment that we're experiencing.